Japan burned under one banner, Toyotomi Hideyoshi's. By mid-1590, his armies marched east to crush the last holdouts of resistance. The powerful Hojo clan, entrenched in their massive fortress at Odawara, refused to yield. To the north, a lesser-known prize stood, Oshi Castle, a stronghold in the marshes of Musashi province, whose stubborn defenders threatened Hideyoshi's encirclement of the Kanto region. Oshi Castle rose from mud and water. Built not atop hills but inside a plain of rice fields and canals, its moats were fed by the Tone and Arakawa rivers. The walls stood modest in height, but ringed by levees and interlocking waterways. Hidden culverts and raised causeways made navigation treacherous for enemies. Its castellan, Narita Nagachika, was a seasoned warrior in his 60s, formerly a minor daimyo and now sworn to the Hojo. Within his walls gathered a garrison of roughly 500 men, samurai, ashigaru, foot soldiers, and armed villagers. Teenagers hauled arrows to the towers. Women boiled rice beneath reed awnings. Carpenters inspected joints in the gates every morning. Signal drums beat in timed pulses, 3 in the morning, 5 at dusk. The castle's lanterns glowed behind slatted wood, showing only flickers from the outer marsh. Patrol boats rode the moat under low clouds. In a storehouse built on stilts, a reserve of rice was sealed in waterproof barrels, raised above flood lines. Nagachika read the latest scroll from Odawara. The ink smudged slightly, likely written during rain. The message offered no hope, reinforcements unlikely. Hold Oshi. Delay them. He handed it silently to his eldest son, Narita Yujinaga, a quiet man who wore his armor even during sleep. Yujinaga studied the words, then nodded. They will try to crush us fast, he said. They'll find Oshi doesn't sink, Nagachika replied. On June 23, banners appeared beyond the southern dikes. Ishida Mitsunari, 30 years old and already a favored general of Hideyoshi, arrived with 20,000 men. His ranks included engineers, surveyors, and conscripted farmers. His personal mon, a circle split into 4 curved triangles, fluttered above a wide command tent. Mitsunari's scouts avoided the center roads. Instead, they took notes along irrigation paths, drainage trenches, and floodplains. Within days, they erected embankment markers, wooden stakes tied with twine, forming arcs around the low basin. Mitsunari gathered his officers under canvas and unrolled a detailed map of the marsh. We will dam the rivers, he said. Let the water do our work. His lead engineer, Kobayakawa Ichi, warned him, this land shifts. Every ditch has a name. You flood them wrong, the water flows back. Then we must learn their names, Mitsunari replied. Narita Nagachika stood atop the western watchtower, studying the enemy's outer banks. He marked the construction pace, 1 span of wall per day, curving inwards from the east and west. His scouts returned at dusk, soaked to the waist, with reports, 40 rafts, 19 carpenters, 10 ox carts of stone, and local peasants forced to build. Yujinaga crouched beside his father, listening. They'll finish the first dike in 10 days, Nagachika said. Then we have 10 nights to prepare. Inside the keep, a monk from a nearby temple arrived bearing a cache of preserved food, dried millet, salted loach, and pickled daikon sealed in ceramic. Nagachika gave the monk shelter and ordered rain cloaks distributed to ashigaru on night patrols. By June 30, the first dike stood firm. Summer rain struck the plain. Wind rippled the surface of the flooded fields. Mitsunari's men cheered as water reached halfway up the outer ramparts. Patrol boats probed the moat, testing current strength. Archers aboard wore straw coats and rested bows on the gunwales. Inside Oshi, carpenters hammered through the night, reinforcing gate beams with triple crossbars. Boiled rice was sealed inside waxed boxes. Lanterns were placed atop floating bamboo discs to serve as nighttime signals. The bell tower was wrapped in oilcloth to protect the clapper from moisture. Nagachika walked the interior levee alone, cloak soaked, watching the dark water lap at the foundation stones. He paused beside an elderly ashigaru, who stood guard with a spear leaning against his shoulder. Your name? Nagachika asked. Tadano Saburo, Lord. You know this land? Born in that field there, the old man said, pointing toward the submerged rice stalks. Nagachika nodded. Then the land fights with us. On July 2, the second embankment began construction. Mitsunari's engineers fanned out, measuring every depression, noting which routes still drained naturally. They planted flagpoles to test wind direction and tied white silk to measure water rise per hour. Nagachika received another message, Odawara still held. He gathered his men in the main hall. Rain tapped the shingles as he spoke. The enemy builds walls. We build will. Oshi is not a fortress of stone. It is a memory of the land. Let the flood come. Outside, fog rolled across the moat. The water climbed another finger's width. July 3, 1590, Oshi Castle. At sunrise, fog clung to the water like cloth. The flooded fields shimmered silver under a low sky. Near the castle's southwest wall, a shigaru pulled a half-sunken boat from a drowned storehouse. The vessel bore the Hojo crest, evidence that even their outer posts were now submerged. Rice stalks floated loose in the water, their roots drowned days ago. Narita Nagachika stood knee-deep in the courtyard, wrapped in a straw cloak. He watched his men lash barrels to a supply raft. Rope cracked under tension. A carpenter, soaked to the elbows, drove a wedge into the gate's new water brace, an X-beam of pine reinforced with iron rivets. We'll need more resin to seal these joints, the carpenter muttered. Use the old wellhouse roof, Nagachika replied. Strip it down. Inside the keep, water buckets were placed at every corner. Rain leaked from joints between roof beams. Tatami mats were lifted onto crates. In the barracks, soldiers dried bowstrings over heated stones. The air smelled of wet straw, ash, and boiled rice. Outside the walls, Ishida Mitsunari's men pressed on. By July 5, both the eastern and western embankments stretched over 1,500 paces each. His engineers marked water rise in measured increments, 3 shaku per day. They modified sluice gates to control release from the Tone River's diverted arm. Laborers worked in shifts, hauling clay and stone through the night by lantern light. Mitsunari walked the eastern rampart at dawn. Rain pattered on his wide hat. His sandals left dark impressions in the mud. He paused beside his top surveyor, a man named Okubo Riku. How long before the water reaches their second wall? Riku tapped his bamboo gauge. 4 more days. Unless they break the dike. Can they? If they know where the seam is, yes. That night, fog drifted thick over the plain. Just before midnight, Oshi's signal drum rang once, sharp, fast. Jiro, Narita's spearman, led a sortie of 10 swimmers out the northern culvert. They wore black, their faces smeared with ash. Each man carried a saw-toothed blade, a float made from bundled gourds, and a rope harness. They moved silent as eels, pushing through reed beds. The enemy's eastern embankment loomed ahead, still under construction, guarded by torches on tripods. A dog barked near the far sentry post, but the wind masked the swimmer's sounds. Jiro crept to the base of the dike. He jammed his blade into the soft-packed clay. Water oozed in. A second man followed. Together, they carved a V-shaped gap. Then, without a word, they slid back into the marsh. By sunrise, that section of the dike had slumped nearly a hand's width. Mitsunari cursed as engineers scrambled to repair it. The patch took 3 hours, and 30 men. Inside the castle, spirits rose. On July 7, the defenders launched a second sortie, this time with decoy rafts. Floating bundles of brush, wrapped in cloth and lit with lanterns, were released into the current. From a distance, they looked like manned boats. Enemy archers fired in alarm. Patrol craft chased them westward, away from the real infiltration. Under that cover, 3 divers swam beneath the enemy's new water towers. These were floating watch posts, wooden platforms chained to rafts, bearing torch poles and signal flags. The defenders smeared pitch along the seams of the float supports and lit oil-wrapped cloth before vanishing beneath the water. 2 towers burned. 1 collapsed into the flood. Rain fell harder. July 9 saw wind gusts from the south. The water level crept up the outer wall, just beneath the arrow slits. Inside Oshi, horses were moved to second-level stalls. Food stores were hoisted by pulley into the upper storehouse. Children stayed indoors, wrapping their legs in oiled cloth. The shrine bell was silenced to avoid giving away position changes. Nagachika walked the flooded passage near the eastern gate. He paused at a floating tray of incense, placed there by the women in prayer. Behind him, Yujinaga approached, carrying a soaked letter. "Odawara still stands," Yujinaga said. Nagachika exhaled. "Then so shall we." Mitsunari's patience frayed. On July 10, he ordered a new defense, chain booms, massive linked logs stretched across the flooded southern field, meant to block sorties. Iron hooks were driven into the logs to catch swimmers or boats. Patrols were doubled. Rafts were armed with pikes and fire-hardened stakes. The embankments were reinforced with sloped reinforcements, angled to shed any undermining flow. Inside Oshi, the carpenters studied enemy tactics. A former canal worker, now serving as a shigaru, offered insight. "If we push water from the north sluice during the next rain, we might reverse their flow," briefly, he said. Nagachika approved the plan. Rain was expected in 2 nights. "Let's give them a flood of our own," he said. The next evening, thunder cracked over the plain. The sluice was opened just after midnight. Water poured through the rear canal. A wave surged south, catching one enemy raft off guard. The boom groaned under sudden pressure. One log chain snapped, scattering debris into the dark. Mitsunari ordered a halt to night patrols. "The marsh," he said, "has turned against us." Inside Oshi, a candle burned beside a shrine. A woman knelt before it, whispering the names of drowned ancestors. Outside her window, water lapped against the stone foundation, but still did not breach. July 12, 1590, Musashi Province, south of Oshi. The embankments swelled like earthen dragons. Mitsunari's engineers added bulk, double-thick clay walls, outer stone ribs, and cross-braced scaffolding on the interior. Blacksmiths fashioned iron caps for the floodgate levers. Laborers slept in wet tents along the dike edges. Rain made the earth slick and treacherous, one slipped and drowned beneath a cart of soil. From the top of the southern rise, Mitsunari studied the castle through a brass spyglass. Oshi floated amid the flooded plain, wrapped in morning haze. The reflection of its rooftops shimmered in the brown water. It had not cracked, sunk, or surrendered. "How high now?" he asked. Surveyor Riku checked his marked staff. 8 shaku from the second wall. 10 more and the lower barracks drown. "Then we need more rain," Mitsunari muttered. He ordered 2 more embankments, one from the northwest, where runoff still escaped, and one across the eastern edge of the canal. Earth, timber, and sweat were his siege weapons now. Inside Oshi Castle, the defenders adapted. Carpenters raised walkways above the courtyard. A shigaru used woven mats as stepping stones along submerged corridors. One tower was converted into a floating armory, with weapon racks lashed to bamboo rafts. The smell of damp wood and oil hung in every corridor. Yujinaga counted stores: 35 bags of rice, 15 barrels of salted fish, 7 crates of dried tea. Enough for 4 weeks if rationed tightly. Nagachika added smoked eel and duck from a marsh trap line, his only personal contribution to the stores. "We are not beaten by water," he said. "We live with it." A runner arrived at dusk. His skin was scratched and bleeding, his raft had overturned near the chain boom, and he swam the last furlong. His news, the Hojo at Odawara still held. But the Tone River upstream was rising dangerously. Nagachika turned to the carpenter chief. "We may need a levee within the levee." By July 14, Mitsunari's siege city expanded. Watchtowers on rafts were refitted with iron-spiked rails. Cannons arrived, 3 bronze culverins drawn by oxen, hauled through waist-deep water. They were positioned on high platforms near the eastern bank. Artillerymen tested powder in the humidity using sparking wheels rather than match cords. That evening, with fanfare and signal horns, the first cannon fired. The ball struck the outer stone of Oshi's east wall and skipped harmlessly into the moat. The castle did not respond. Mitsunari gave the order for intermittent shelling, 1 shot per hour to strain morale, not breach walls. The reports echoed across the water like distant thunder. Inside the keep, children flinched at each boom. Narita Nagachika studied a cannonball embedded in the wall. It had cracked the outer stone but failed to penetrate the clay-packed core. He summoned his senior Ashigaru captain, Hirata Denjiro, and pointed to the fissure. "We patch it tonight. Use oak wedges. Plug it before the next shot." Denjiro bowed. And the inner fields? Flooded, but still stable. That night, under a moon obscured by cloud, the defenders moved silently along the inner ring levee. Their hands were calloused, their backs bent, but the walls held. On July 15, Oshi's defenders struck again. At dawn, 6 rafts, each packed with bundles of wet straw and sealed fire jars, were launched toward the eastern artillery platform. The rafts moved with the current. Archers on the wall fired flaming arrows into the bundles. 2 platforms caught fire. 1 cannon crew leapt into the water. Mitsunari ordered the rest pulled back until defenses were rebuilt. He conferred with his engineers near the southeast bank. "This castle defies sense," he said. Riku replied, "It rises because of its soil." The builders use gravel and loam, porous but firm. Their ring levees are angled and layered. The more water we add, the more it lifts. "Then we must exceed the design," Mitsunari said. "Bury it." He ordered all canals blocked. The marshes would be drowned fully. Inside Oshi, Narita adjusted. He relocated the command post to the 3rd story of the central keep. Fires were kept low to avoid smoke signatures. Messages were sent by weighted rope over the tower, 1 tug for ready, 2 for raided, 3 for broken gate. Nagachika spoke to his men from the watchtower. "They think a river will conquer us. They forgot who planted these fields. We built this land." Below him, boats drifted silently across the flooded courtyard, oars tucked and blades ready. July 17, 1590, marshes north of Oshi. The sky held its breath. A humid stillness blanketed the lowlands. Frogs had stopped croaking. Crickets chirped fitfully from reeds now half submerged. Ishida Mitsunari stood atop his southern dike, staring across a field transformed into a lake. Water lapped the banks with quiet menace. Surveyor Riku arrived breathless, scrolls tucked under his arm. The canal beyond the temple flooded. The old spillway burst. Cause? Rain upstream. Tone River rose faster than expected. Mitsunari closed his fan. Then the water fights both sides. He ordered all laborers to reinforce the outer berms. New wedges of bamboo and brush were rammed into soft clay. Floodgates were shut and lashed. Pumps were built, simple bucket chains, turned by men on treadmills. Inside Oshi Castle, the view had changed. The watchtower now stood like a mast above a sea of brown water. The rooftops of drowned farmhouses poked through the mist. A torii gate half-submerged marked the shrine on the far bank. Tatami mats were abandoned in piles near the outer wall, too sodden to save. Yujinaga directed children to fill ceramic jars with dried rice. The food was moved to a higher storeroom. The castle's interior wells, sealed before the flood, were opened cautiously. Their water remained clear, sealed tight with wax and layered straw. Ashigaru filtered it through cloth before drinking. Carpenters turned their attention to lattice doors, remaking them as rafts. Each was bound with hemp rope and topped with lanterns fixed in waterproof frames. These makeshift craft served as message boats between the keep and towers. On July 19, a midday storm rolled over Musashi. Thunder cracked above the castle. Wind tore loose thatch from enemy tents. Mitsunari's embankments sagged in places, sluices straining against the pressure. 2 laborers were washed into the dike trench and vanished. Still, the water climbed, now brushing the upper foundation of Oshi's outer walls. Cannon fire paused. The powder spoiled in the damp. Tents collapsed. Rafts drifted from their moorings. Mitsunari's officers took shelter beneath tarps, poring over charts weighted with stones. One engineer warned, "If the southern dike gives, our camp will drown." Mitsunari said nothing. He stared into the downpour, jaw tight. Inside Oshi, morale flickered but did not die. Jiro, Narita's retainer, led morning patrols through ankle-high water in the keep's halls. Every doorframe was marked with chalk to measure swelling. Every polearm was oiled against rust. Nagachika sat in the upper hall, sharpening his short blade. Before him lay 3 messages, one from Odawara, still holding, one from a loyal peasant village, submerged, one from a captured scout. "They fear we've summoned spirits," Yujinaga said quietly. "Good," Nagachika replied. That night, a 3rd sortie was launched, this time under heavy fog. 15 men on bamboo mats drifted along the current toward the northern embankment. Each carried a gourd of thick oil and a clay fire jar. Reaching the base of the dike, they smeared oil along the new joints, where clay hadn't set fully. They lit the jars and fled. Flames ran low along the base like snakes. Earthen walls hissed and cracked. By morning, one entire segment had slumped 4 shaku. Mitsunari raged. He ordered iron stakes driven into every slope. Spears were tied to floating barriers to pierce swimmers. All work crews now carried bows, not just shovels. On July 22, a desperate measure was tried. Watch drums were placed on raft towers at the perimeter. When movement stirred the water, the nearest drum was struck. Within moments, arrows would fly into the dark. Narita's men adapted. They towed logs behind their rafts, causing noise upriver while striking downstream. A dummy, made from straw and old armor, was floated into range. The enemy wasted 2 volleys before realizing the trick. Inside the keep, the defenders repurposed temple bells as water depth gauges. Hung from beams, their tones changed with rising flood. One bell had gone silent, it now floated freely. By July 24, Mitsunari's camp had changed. Sentries stood on platforms. Supply carts were half-sunken. Horses were stabled on barges. Rice was rationed, mold had set into the stores. Still, the castle stood. A messenger from Odawara arrived soaked and limping. Mitsunari read the scroll, "Proceed. Victory required." He turned to his officer. "Build one more embankment. From the western ridge. Seal every path." Riku hesitated. "That ridge holds the old burial mounds. Soft ground. Do it." At dawn, Narita Nagachika met with his retainers. They stood on the 3rd floor as rain streaked the windows. "They mean to choke the castle," Denjiro said. "Let them," Nagachika replied. "We are not stone. We move with the land." Outside, the water rippled, silent, patient. July 25, 1590, South Dike, siege perimeter. The floodwaters lapped at Mitsunari's boots. He stood atop the western embankment, a ridge raised hastily through soaked burial mounds. His armor was spotted with mud. Behind him, engineers barked orders, sandbags were stacked like bricks, bundles of rushes were lashed over slumping clay. Every hour brought another leak. The Tone River's diverted surge had outpaced calculations. It spilled through fields and filled every hollow, turning low ground into a shallow inland sea. No birds called. Crops drowned. Roads vanished. 3 more shaku and the 2nd ring wall is gone, Riku reported. Mitsunari narrowed his eyes at Oshi Castle, now half-shrouded in morning mist. The upper towers remained untouched. Smoke rose from within, no panic, no fire signals. Just cooking smoke. Inside the walls, Narita Nagachika moved from post to post. Every step squelched. Wooden planks floated across the inner yard. A tethered goat bleated from the top floor of a storage shed. Children ferried baskets of dried vegetables by raft. Tatami mats had long been rolled and stacked on the third floor. A shigaru stood waist-deep in water at the gate. One held a bamboo pole, using it to test depth every 10 minutes. The outer ring wall had gone under. Only the upper parapets remained, their tips like teeth on a drowning beast. Nagachika passed the shrine room, where women lit candles and sang old battle prayers. The altar, raised on stones, remained dry. "Keep the fire steady," he said to them. "Even gods drift, but the flame must not." By July 27, water covered every road within a ri of the castle. Villagers who had fled earlier now floated past on rafts, waving toward the castle but not approaching. One woman paddled with a single sandal. She vanished behind reeds. Yujinaga reported the latest measurements. Flood line stabilized at 10 shaku above the main courtyard. Still below the third floor. And the foundation? Holding. Loam under stone. The ring levees flex, not break. Nagachika nodded. Oshi Castle, unlike most mountain fortresses, had been designed with layered embankments and raised cores. Its heart stood atop a gravel mound, a subtle elevation that, now, made the difference between ruin and survival. Mitsunari's patience cracked. On July 28, he called an emergency council beneath oilcloth tarps. Officers sat cross-legged around a damp scroll map. Rain tapped their helmets. Flies buzzed around fish-salted rice left untouched. "We have raised 4 embankments, diverted 2 rivers, drowned half the district. And yet the castle stands," Mitsunari said. One officer, Sakai Daisuke, replied, "Then the land itself protects them." Another muttered, "It is a cursed place." Mitsunari rose. "It is not cursed. It is engineered." He ordered the final lock dam to be built at the canal's last escape point. If the castle would not drown, he would trap it until starvation finished what the flood could not. Inside Oshi, morale frayed at the edges. Salted food supplies ran low. Only 1 barrel of dried loach remained. The archers reduced patrols to preserve strength. Messages from Odawara came slower, soaked and smeared, delivered by the few runners who dared the flooded expanse. Still, no desertions occurred. Nagachika gathered his inner circle beneath the eaves of the watchtower. Rain whispered on the roof. "They will not stop," Denjiro said. "Even the gods would flee this siege." "But we are not gods," Nagachika replied. "We are their memory. That is enough." On July 30, thunder boomed again over Musashi. The final embankment neared completion. Engineers placed the last capstone at sunrise. Water churned, locked inside a prison of mud and muscle. Mist curled over the field like rising steam. The castle, fully surrounded, refused to yield. One of Mitsunari's ashigaru stood atop a raft, staring at Oshi. "Still cooking rice," he whispered. "Still lighting lanterns." That night, the water crept into the enemy camp itself. A quartermaster reported that 6 tents had floated away. The oxen broke their tether lines and had to be pulled from the water. Within Oshi, Narita's men fished from windows. A boy caught a silver carp in a wooden basin. Yujinaga gave it to the cooks, no seasoning left, but flesh enough to feed 20. A banner was raised atop the keep, the Hojomon, sun-bleached but unfallen. Nagachika touched the wall, wet, mossy, cool. "This place was built by men who knew the river," he said. Jiro approached. "And it stands because we honor their work." The castle did not rise out of stone. It floated, because it was meant to. It shifted with the water. It endured not by defiance, but by design. August 1, 1590, inside Oshi Castle. Lanterns burned low. The smell of smoke and mildew filled the hall. Rain tapped the tiled roofs, steady as breath. Inside the keep, silence ruled. No drums sounded. No cries echoed. The castle had become an island, surrounded by a sea not born of tide, but of war. Narita Nagachika sat in the main hall, his armor stacked neatly beside him. His kimono, patched and damp, clung to his frame. In front of him lay letters, some from Odawara, others from villages now lost beneath the flood. One was sealed with red wax, the ink faded. Yujinaga entered carrying a clay pot. Boiled barley. Enough for 12. Nagachika took a small bowl. Let the children eat first. In the guard tower, Hirata Denjiro checked the rain depth marker. 11 shaku, 4 sun. The water had not risen in 2 days, but nor had it dropped. Floating debris, rooftops, broken rafts, half-submerged gates, circled the keep like drifting ghosts. Denjiro moved to the wall, stared into the gray. Nothing stirred. Even the enemy had gone quiet. In the upper gallery, a Shigeru Kanda Ichiro knelt, polishing his naginata. The blade gleamed silver in the lamplight. He muttered the names of those lost, brothers drowned in the early sorties, cousins cut down near the boom line. Nearby, an older soldier taught a boy how to knot a sling. The child's name was Takashi, age 10. His job was to light lanterns each night. He had not cried since the water reached the kitchen. That evening, a single note rang out from the bell tower, sharp and clear. It was not alarm. It marked a funeral. One of the village elders, Nakamura Sobiai, had passed in his sleep. His body, too frail to burn, was wrapped in reeds and sunk with a prayer beneath the water. Nagachika watched from the top floor. As the shrouded form disappeared, he spoke softly. We bury no cowards. Outside the walls, the enemy's mood soured. Mitsunari remained in his command tent, damp scrolls spread before him. His hands shook from fever, one leg infected by a leech bite. Still he gave orders, tighten rations, replace reed roofing, recall broken patrols. One of his officers, Kawai Masanobu, spoke plainly. The flood is stable. But the men are not. Mitsunari replied, then break the defenders before ours break. He dispatched a formal demand, surrender or drown. The scroll was sealed and placed in a lacquered box, then floated to the castle gate on a covered raft. Inside Oshi, the scroll was read aloud in the great hall. Rain beat the windows. Children sat cross-legged. A Shigeru leaned on spears. Nagachika stood as it ended. No reply, he said. In the eastern barracks, a storm lantern flickered. Jiro sat carving wooden floats for trap lines. Each one bore a child's name, etched with a dull knife. A woman passed, holding a baby wrapped in a cloth sling. Her feet were cracked from weeks of wet stone. Why do you carve them? She asked. They drift slower, Jiro said. The days passed in rhythm, rain, patrol, rice, repair. Signal ropes were checked. Arrows were fletched with crow feathers. All waste was sealed and sunk away from the fresh well. The carpenters reinforced floor beams with scavenged lumber from drowned outposts. In the main shrine, a monk lit incense before the statue of Fudomayu, the immovable one. The incense ran low, so the flame was shared carefully, passed from wick to wick with folded hands. On August 4th, a runner arrived, soaked, breathless, shaking. He had floated half the journey, hiding among drowned fence posts. He carried one message. Odawara is surrounded. The Hojo may fall. Nagachika received the scroll in silence. He placed it on the floor, then poured water over it. Truth waits, he said. That night, the castle slept in layers, children atop rafters, guards beside tower windows, Nagachika seated upright with his sword across his knees. Outside, the flood reached its quietest. No more cannon fire. No horns. Only the water, still and cold, holding its breath. August 6, 1590, Mitsunari's camp. The drums had stopped. For the first time in weeks, no signal horns blew. The embankments, once crowded with shouting overseers and carts, now held still men beneath soaked banners. Ishida Mitsunari emerged from his tent wrapped in a cloak that clung like old bark. He looked toward Oshi Castle, now more legend than place. The sky hung low, silver-gray with no wind. Smoke curled from the castle's chimneys. No surrender flag flew. Mitsunari's hands trembled. His leg infection had worsened. Riku brought him another scroll from Odawara. They say the walls will not hold another month. Mitsunari crushed the scroll in his fist. Then I must end this in days. Inside Oshi, the defenders moved with quiet purpose. Narita Nagachika walked the inner ring levee, nodding to each man at post. His cloak had been patched 5 times. His sandals were leather wrapped in straw. He stopped at the carpenter's platform, where young Takashi was drying reeds. "Today is a good day," Nagachika said. "Because it didn't rain?" the boy asked. "No," the old samurai replied. "Because they still watch us. That means we still matter." On August 7th, a second message arrived, smuggled by raft. It confirmed what the first had only whispered. Odawara had begun secret talks. The Hojo might surrender. Yujinaga read the words twice, then turned to his father. "We held longer than anyone thought possible. It may be time." Nagachika shook his head. "It will be time when they send terms, not rumors." That night, Jiro led one final reconnaissance. He swam beneath the moonlight, through reeds and broken fences. He reached the outer embankment and pulled himself onto a floating log. What he saw was telling. Half the tents were empty. The patrol lines were thinner. One watchtower had collapsed, its frame sagging into the water. Soldiers now wore loose armor. Their campfires burned low. The siege had not broken Oshi. It had worn down its besieger. Mitsunari met with his officers that same night. "The castle endures," Masanobu said. "And morale crumbles." "Then we must force their hand," Mitsunari answered. "Send envoys. Offer surrender. But make it sound like mercy." He ordered 3 boats prepared, each bearing white cloth and lacquered boxes of scrolls. On August 8, the boats approached slowly. The water was still as glass. Oshi's walls watched in silence. A signal flag was raised. No arrows flew. The boat stopped at the outer gate. From within the castle, a single lantern blinked 3 times, "We receive." The scrolls were carried inside. Narita read them beside his fire. Yujinaga stood nearby, hands clenched. "Your defense has honored your clan. Further resistance is not required. Surrender, and your retainers will be spared. The Narita name will endure." Nagachika looked up. "Write this reply," he said. "We do not resist out of pride. We resist because this land remembers how to endure." Yujinaga hesitated. "Shall I send it?" "No," said Nagachika. "Tomorrow, I speak myself." The next morning, August 9th, Narita Nagachika walked alone to the edge of the water. He wore his best armor, polished but dented. His family sword rested at his side. On the outer embankment, Mitsunari waited, standing despite his fever. They met atop a raft platform, with no bodyguards. Only the quiet of rainless sky between them. "I have read your message," Nagachika said. Mitsunari nodded. "Then you know surrender will save your men." "I ask this," Nagachika said. They returned to their fields. "The castle is left untouched." "You have my word." Nagachika nodded once. "Then Oshi opens its gates." That afternoon, the bells rang from the highest tower, 2 slow chimes, then 1 long. Inside the keep, a shigaru unbarred the inner doors. The villagers wept. Children stared at the water, unsure what came next. But no one ran. No one begged. They had survived the flood. They had survived Mitsunari. The gates creaked open. And the floating castle breathed. August 10th, 1590, Oshi Castle. The gates opened slowly. The first sound was the creak of damp hinges. The second was silence. No cheers. No cries. Just the quiet breath of those who had waited in the water for 40 days. Ishida Mitsunari stood ashore with his officers. His fever had not broken, and a bandage wrapped his leg. When Narita Nagachika stepped forward, Mitsunari bowed, not deeply, but enough to acknowledge what had passed. "You held longer than anyone else in Musashi," Mitsunari said. "And you flooded longer than any general before you," Nagachika replied. Behind them, the defenders emerged. A shigaroo with slung spears. Villagers gripping makeshift paddles. Carpenters carrying tool chests across floating platforms. They did not appear defeated. They looked like a people who had survived drowning. That evening, Mitsunari's scribes recorded the terms: surrender without execution, preservation of the Narita name, limited disarmament, Oshi to be absorbed under Toyotomi control. The scroll was sealed and ferried to Odawara. The castle's moat now stretched 2 ri in every direction. From above, it looked like a citadel atop a lake. Soldiers on both sides began calling it Ukihiro, the floating castle. August 11 to 20, 1590, Odawara. The final terms were signed. The Hojo surrendered. Their great walls were breached not by siege, but by starvation and negotiation. Hideyoshi stood victorious over all of Japan. Unification, at last, had come. But not without lesson. When Mitsunari returned to the central command camp, Hideyoshi asked one question. "Did you win by sword?" "No," Mitsunari answered. "I won by water." "And yet it stands?" "Yes," said Mitsunari. "It floats." Hideyoshi nodded. "Then let it remain. Let the land remember it." Late summer, Oshi Castle. The waters receded slowly. The embankments, broken by order, collapsed back into mud. The Tone River returned to its natural course. Ducks returned to the reeds. The drowned rice fields lay fallow, but would be planted again by autumn. Narita Nagachika stood on the second-floor walkway, watching the carpenters repair the outer gates. A boy ran by carrying a new thatch roll. Yujinaga was already measuring the western levee for reinforcement. "Will they let us keep it?" Yujinaga asked. Nagachika nodded. "We tend it. We guard it. But it belongs now to the peace." Word of Oshi spread. In the capital, monks wrote of a castle that defied rivers. In mountain inns, travelers whispered about walls that rose with the flood. Children in villages tied paper boats and let them float down creeks, naming them for Nagachika. Soldiers who had fought in the siege spoke with quiet respect. They did not call it a defeat. They called it a warning. No siege is stronger than the land itself. Autumn 1590, Musashi Province. Harvest returned. New rice was planted. Roads reopened. Villagers rebuilt their homes. At Oshi, the castle walls remained stained with a high water line, a single muddy band that wrapped the entire keep. No one washed it off. It became a symbol. Schoolchildren touched it before class. Wives left offerings beneath it during festival days. And when Toyotomi officials passed through Musashi, they bowed their heads toward the keep. The siege of Oshi was not the largest battle of the Odawara campaign. It was not the bloodiest. But it was the most strange, and the most human. It told of walls that breathed with the earth. Of warriors who fought the rain with rope and oil. Of a castle that rose not in defiance, but in balance. Ishida Mitsunari would go on to rise, and fall, at Sekigahara. Hideyoshi would unify Japan, then dream of conquest beyond its shores. But in the low marshes of Musashi, among reeds and gravel, a forgotten castle reminded Japan that not all victories are born from fire. Some float. Thank you for joining us for The Floating Castle, the true story of one of Japan's most remarkable defenses. If you enjoyed this historical epic, subscribe for more tales of strategy, honor, and the men and women who shaped an age.